Hey everybody, my name is Prokopenko. I'm the founder of Proko, and today I'm going to be doing a little presentation about anatomy. I've been teaching anatomy for a very long time. Have like over 360 videos on it on Proko.com, and in this presentation, what I did was I went through all the material that I've put together over the years and tried to find the things that most people miss, the things people struggle with the most. And so it's going to be a lot of information, and it's going to be a lot of difficult information. And so this presentation is not necessarily for beginners. If you're very new to anatomy, this might be painful for you. Your brain might explode from all the information you're going to hear. So, you know, approach it lightly. But if you have some experience with anatomy, this is going to be really fun. It's going to be a lot of useful information. And also just wanted to say that my anatomy course today is 20% off if you are still looking to get it. You just use code anatomy X. That's that. Proko, by the way, this is for Vision X live convention. So welcome to everybody who doesn't know Proko. But we have four. Whoa, why is that? Hold up. Something's weird, but I think we're okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry guys. My browser is showing me something totally different, so I was a little confused. But John, text me if something looks off in the stream. I'll just keep going. So Proko has 4 things we're doing with Vision X this weekend. The first one just finished with Andrew Keith. He did a sculpting thing. Now I'm doing anatomy. And then tomorrow, Scott Flanders is doing a concept design video. And then I'm part of a panel about the future of art education. So if you guys want to catch those are part of Vision X. If you don't know what Vision X is, go to visionxlive.com, and it's a convention. It's an online conference happening right now. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation. Anatomy for Pros by me. This is Skelly, my sidekick. So to prepare for this, I asked a bunch of my professional artist friends, what part of anatomy do you struggle with the most? And they weren't very helpful. They just told me about their personal lives. Just kidding. They were helpful. They told me a bunch of stuff that they struggled with. But out of that, the things that they did not mention were things like pecs and abs and biceps and triceps. You know, the stuff that we all start studying when we start studying anatomy, you know, the things that we think are like the most important, you know, pecs and abs and all that stuff. So those people don't struggle with, but the things that people do tend to struggle with are the body parts that are kind of, people don't think about, like the back. You know, it's very important. The back, legs even, forearms, incredibly difficult. My personal nemesis is armpits, which is why I did this demonstration in my anatomy class where I had his arms up and I had to completely focus on his armpit. And it was incredibly educational for me to do this as well, as I was teaching the class. But doing these kinds of studies is what's really going to help you get better at anatomy. Why doesn't it go? Okay. So to prepare for that study, I did a tracing, and it's not cheating. I'm not like selling this thing. An anatomy tracing essentially is just it's you trying to study what's happening in the photo. It's you learning about anatomy. So the purpose or what you're doing is basically imagining what it looks like under the skin. If you take the skin off, what are you going to see? And it's not just about tracing the bumps you see on the surface. There's a lot of stuff that you're not seeing on the surface, or it's not obvious, that if you understand what's happening, you can use that information to design things better. And so, to prepare, I also looked at the skeleton, the bones, because all that musculature, all the fat, the muscles, the tendons, all that stuff is based on the bones. The skeleton is what holds everything together. It's what moves the body. So when the bones move, the muscles will follow. Or, well, actually the muscles control the bones, but you know what I mean. It's the first layer underneath. And then after that initial, those studies, I started my sketch. And doing all that stuff before makes it so much easier to then jump right in with confidence and know exactly what's happening in my drawing. And then all that shading on top is just fun afterwards. But this is what everybody jumps to in the beginning. It's this final step of trying to shade and make things three-dimensional. This is the fun part. But again, without the prep work, without studying of the function, what's underneath, designing things based on information, this shading is very, very difficult. And by the way, okay, you guys at home or wherever you are, I want see if you know this. So right here, this is the serratus, right? These little finger muscles. Try to think about where does it begin, right? It ends on the rib cage, obviously. They insert on the ribs. But it wraps around, and then where does it end? Or where does it start, really? Most people that I ask get this wrong. Or not most, probably it's about half and half. So the answer is it begins on the scapula, the shoulder blade muscle, or the shoulder blade bone. And it's actually underneath, in between the scapula and the rib cage, along the back right here. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse. It's probably small. But a lot of people say, they guess that the serratus ends like here on the back of the rib cage. And if you think about that, that doesn't really make sense. Because imagine if the serratus actually started on the rib cage and ended on the rib cage. What would its function be? What would it do? Like break your bones? That's the purpose. But knowing this, knowing just where it starts, informs you of a lot of things. Anytime the shoulder moves, this rhythm of where these flow will change, because this insertion or origin point will move with the arm. And I'll show you in a second here when this matters. So everybody knows about the subcutaneous portion. The subcutaneous is the part directly underneath the skin. These are the tips that we see. But most of it's actually covered up by the latissimus dorsi. This is a large muscle, but it's very skinny. And so when it is relaxed, this right here, this big muscle all through here, this is the lat. And when the lat is relaxed, this rhythm we're seeing right through here, pretty clear rhythm, and this big bump, that's just the serratus. These little fingers keep going, and then they attach right through here underneath. Right through here they go underneath the scapula and attach. But in the part where they're not under the scapula yet, they're very much influencing the surface form and the lat just kind of wrapping around it. When the lat flexes, look what's happening. All of a sudden, we don't have this rhythm of the serratus anymore. the lat form takes over because it's flexed. It's not a soft form that'll just wrap over whatever's under it like a cloth. Now it's a pipe. It's flexing. It's going from one point to another in a straight line. And so knowing these things makes you able to understand why you're seeing what you're seeing, and then design it more correctly when you're actually drawing it. Because if you didn't know that, you might design all these shadows in here in a way that looks kind of funky. You might not make it look like this is the serratus underneath going into the scapula with a thin cloth-like muscle on top of it. So here's the lat again in here. But this is the back. You can see it's very simple. Not really. It's extremely complicated. There's a lot of stuff going on, and it's probably why a lot of people avoid it. But there are some things that once you know them, it makes the back so much easier to understand when you're looking at it. First, let's start with the scapula muscles. These are all the muscles that attach to this scapula bone right here. This isn't all of them. We also have the stuff in between them, but these are the scapula muscles I typically talk about. And there's really two that are really, really important. The infraspinatus and the teres major. This is the large one here. And then this one is kind of like the pec of the back. Sometimes it's so large and you could just see it going into the arm, kind of like the pecs do. See, right here. It's very large. Kind of look like pecs when you raise the arm. And so it's kind of confusing at first if you don't know what's happening. There's so many bumps here. I mean, just lots of stuff happening. But when you identify the bones, and that's usually the place to start, is the bones, because they're pretty consistent. Once you identify the bones, you can identify the muscles that attach to them. So right here, this is the scapula. This is the spine of the scapula, the part on top. And then this is the ridge, the medial ridge. We go back. Again, this is the spine of the scapula, and this is the medial ridge. And so now when we know this, we can find the muscles around it. So say, oh, okay, infraspinatus, and then right in here at the bottom, teres major. Same thing, 1, 2. In this one, it's pretty clear that the back can look very different based on the position of the arms. When the arms are going back, the scapulas are retracted, everything's compressed, everything's flexed, and all you see is just muscle bumps. When you're not flexing the muscles, instead you're kind of pulling the shoulders forward a little bit, the ridges in here will pop out, and actually what you're seeing is just the edge of the bone. Now, a lot of the muscles are stretched, they're thinned, and so very, very different positions. So again, another reason to study bones. And also just showing this to show you, like, look at that shape, that little upside down L shape. Just pretty clear in both, right? That's the consistent part here. It's either a dimple here or a protrusion here. Another part on another muscle of the scapulas is the traps. And it's these, this part that you see on top of the shoulders. And we think it's just this part. When we think of trapezius, we just think of the top part. But there's actually more. It keeps going down. This is the full trapezius. This is the part we think about, but there's two more forms. One right here, and then one tail that extends downward. And when the scapula is compressed, all of these kind of bunch up and they create bumps on the inside. And there's also three tendons, three very important tendons on this that we need to learn about in order to understand the bumps, because tendons usually stay flat when muscles flex. Because when muscles are flexing, they protrude out, but tendons don't flex. Tendons just kind of are just these skinny things that attach to bones. And so they stay flat and they bunch up around the muscle, or the muscles bunch up around the tendons. So you have this diamond shape in the middle. You have this little triangle here, right on the corner of the scapula. And then you have a little triangle at the bottom here. And here is where we can see the effects. So this tendon here has a little C curve that wraps around the corner of the scapula. And there's the C curve. Muscle's flexing, but the tendon of that muscle stays flat. Same thing here. This keeps going all the way to the spine, right in the middle. And so does this. But the tendon in here creates this W shape. Whoops. Creates this W shape at the bottom. So not only bones are important, not only muscles, but tendons as well to understand the surface. And again, I'm showing this just again to show you the effects of the tendons. So flat tendon here, C curve through here, C curve through here, and then the, well, not a very strong W shape. They're more, it's there's two little there are two little C curves. But this one, I really love this photo because such a strong C curve in here, and also it's kind of a side by side of the two extremes of this muscle. You know, on this side, the scapula is retracting back towards the spine. Like, here's the ridge, the edge of the scapula, and it's really close to the spine. I mean, you got very little space between them. On this side, the shoulder's going forward and out. And so the edge is like right here. It's very far away. And so you're seeing what that muscle looks like when it's stretched, very thinned out. Basically what it does is it reveals more of what's underneath, a lot of what's underneath it. And look at the lat, another example of revealing what's underneath when something's stretched. The rib cage is showing through. You know, with the lat being pulled forward along with all these other muscles, the rib cage, all these ribs, they're popping out because everything's so thin. So understanding the function and the origins and insertions inform you of the layering and what you're actually seeing. And showing the rib cage underneath is actually really important, because anytime you can show some bones on the model, it adds structure, it adds stability to the forms or to the body, and it's not just like a bundle of meat that's somehow floating and stable. So every point of structure is really important to show. And something I want to touch on throughout this presentation is gesture. And we tend to think that gesture is all about like that curve of like the spine, the C curve, and that's really important. That's kind of where you start, you know, or S curve right through here. That's great. The shoulder. What's the gesture of the shoulders? Well, it's kind of like this line across, but not really. There's so much more to the gesture of this pose than just like an angle between the shoulders. This bunching up of the muscles is part of the gesture. It's important to show compression. Stretching and compression is a huge part of gesture. And so without these internal forms, and you can indicate this pretty quickly if you're doing a quick sketch, but you show this compression in here, these zigzags all through here, this compression in here, and you're showing stretching in here, and that's going to inform the viewer a lot about what the shoulders are doing compared to the spine. The twisting of the shoulders, this one going back, this one going forward, is part of the pose. It's part of the story, which the gesture has to show. So anatomy is a big part of gesture. It's not just, you know, curvy stick figures. And again, I recommend, in order to really learn all this stuff, one big way to start, to start before you're really comfortable with doing a drawing of it, is doing tracings of it, because it's a lot more forgiving. It's an easier win for you to get comfortable and, you know, have fun with it. Is to try to just take off the skin and figure out, okay, where's the tendon, where's the muscle. And here I actually forgot about the tendon down here. Oopsies. But yeah, these are really fun. Try to keep them clean like this. In here I even started trying to show the direction of the muscle fibers. You don't have to, but that's another thing you can do. If you want to learn more about how to do an anatomy tracing, proko.com/78. There's a short link to that lesson. It's a free lesson. Just go watch it. But along with that, my anatomy course, the full anatomy course, the premium one, also has a bunch of premium demos. Pretty much every lesson in my anatomy course has premium stuff in it. There's like 360 lessons in it. Assignment demos, 3D models, ebooks, critique videos, just a lot of content. So that was my little mid-roll ad break. Back to muscles and stuff. Let's go on to lower back. When you think about the lower back, everybody thinks about these two pipes right here, the erector spinae, right? These thin pipes through here. But what about these two larger forms right here and right here? I mean, that's not the trapezius. The trapezius ends right there, right? We just learned about that. But it looks like there's just these giant parts in here that extend out pretty far. They're also kind of like pipes, but they're a lot more bloated. And this guy, Anthony, he's just very developed, so they're extra large on him. But this is actually a trick question because it's actually the same muscle. This is also the erector spinae, which is a group of muscles. It's a bunch of different ones. The little pipe that we know of, these two pipes, is right here, this blue part. And it's blue here just because it's covered by tendon. But there's actually another muscle underneath here, or it's part of the same muscle. And then all of these muscles, there's 4 of them here, they all kind of bunch together and they look like one big form on the surface, or 2 if you think of both sides. So you're basically getting little skinny vertical pipes and then slightly diagonal large bumps. And then they're actually covered by 2 muscles. You got another serratus muscle, which is very thin. Usually can't see it. And then the lat. The lat also covers the erector spinae, but remember, it's very thin. It's a cloth-like muscle. And the part of the lat that covers this is mostly tendon. Some of it is muscle, but it's very thin. And so you're pretty much just seeing the form of the erector spinae. But all of this kind of serves to soften out all those muscles into one big mass. So here is, on the left, you have the erector spinae showing through when the lat muscle is stretched. It's relaxed. And all you're seeing is this bump of the erector spinae. And then here, when he pulls back, his lat flexes because he's trying to pull his shoulders back. And it's also just stability. He's doing like a push-up, so all the muscles are flexing to stabilize his body. And you can see pretty clearly like the lat muscle is flexed, and you can no longer see the erector spinae underneath. Another interesting layering part. Forgot about the slide. So basically, this is just to show you that the lat muscle is like a little cape that got stuck in someone's butt cheeks. So try to forget that one. Here's another example of a lat muscle. All of this is the lat of the tendon of the lat, and I don't know what's up with him, but like his muscle just super tight. His tendon here is being pulled so tight. Like imagine if you took a pillowcase and you just kind of pulled it really tight. You're gonna get these folds running across from one hand to the other hand, and that's what's happening here. His muscles are pulling so tight that his tendons are rippling across. Really weird. Okay, arms. Okay. Yeah, so that's me. That's my arm. I like to use myself as a model. No, I'm just kidding. Basically, we're moving on to arms now. And I had to put something funny in there. Okay, so I'm going to skip the triceps and the biceps because you guys already are going to know that stuff on your own. I don't have to... You're going to initially just jump into that. So I'm going to get to the hard stuff. The forearms. Forearms are actually really difficult, even if you try to study them. There's just so many skinny muscles in there, and there's so much happening. And also, your wrist twists, right? It's not the front is not always the front. You know, like when the wrist supinates or pronates, which means it's twisting, the front of one part becomes the back all of a sudden. And so if you're trying to remember diagrams, it's really challenging. But I like to simplify it into 3 groups. The ridge muscles, they're the ones that start all the way up at the top here. They reach almost halfway up to your bicep. And then it kind of wraps around, flows to the front. Then you got the extensor group, which is the red one, and it looks like a bullet that kind of points to the outside of the elbow, right along the elbow. You'll see a little indentation in here, and then from that indent is where the bullet begins, and it flows through into the back of the arm. And then the flexor group, this green part, mostly visible in the front. It's a pretty large mass of muscles. There's a lot of little flowy muscles, but unless someone is like super lean and very developed, it's usually just going to be seen as one large mass, which makes it a little more manageable for us. But sometimes you get stuff like this, right? Very complicated. But again, 3 groups. One right here, ridge group, extensor group, flexor group. Here's a simple version. Ridge group, flexor group, and then the extensor group is in the back. Remember, it flows from the back of the arm to the elbow. So in this pose, it's pretty much behind the forearm. Chicken drumstick. Oh, this is fun. Okay, so you see the little dimple in here? Avoid this giant vein. That's really distracting, kind of not what I'm talking about here, but just this dimple right through here. You know, this big muscle mass, what I was talking about, this is the flexor group. It goes all the way to the bone here. It doesn't just end halfway through. All of these muscles kind of flow into here. But for some reason, it just gets split. And you can probably see this on yourself, no matter how developed you are. If you kind of put your hand, that wrist, into that similar pose that you're seeing here, you're going to see a little ridge, a little thing happening right here. And what's happening is this is a tendon of the bicep. You know, we all know about this tendon, kind of the main one going through into the middle. But we don't know about the second one that actually wraps around the outside of the forearm. And this edge right here pinches in on the muscle, and it just creates an indent. And so it splits all of these muscles in here into into two forms. But only when you're flexing, when all of this stuff gets tight, then that pinching happens. When things are relaxed, it's all just smoothed out into a big mass. Here's just some more examples. These are also premium assignment demos from the course. Ridge group, extensor group, flexor group in the front. Same thing here, 3 groups. Here's more examples. Another highly stylized example. Okay, let's take a little break from all of these muscles and bumps and stuff and just talk a little bit about just dynamic anatomy. Try to relax your brain a little bit. We're done with the upper body except hands, which I'll save to the end because you love hands. So dynamic anatomy, this is the part where, you know, once you study anatomy for a few years and you're starting to really understand it, a lot of artists tend to stiffen things up. They put too much stuff in there. They know too much, and it can actually hurt your drawing. If you forget about those first steps, what really matters in any drawing is the story, right? The composition, what's happening. And the gesture is really what defines that. It's the pose. All the bumps on top are just details that are supposed to enhance the story, enhance the pose. And so the most common mistake that I see people make with gesture and anatomy is the snowman effect. You might have heard of this. This is where you basically just make everything symmetrical, right? You just put like an oval here for the top of the arm. You'll put an oval here for the forearm, and then like an oval for the hand, and then you just like connect them with a line, and it just looks like a stack of ovals. But that's not how the body works. Typically, you're going to have a lot of asymmetry. For example, in the top, the peak is here on this side, and then it's actually here on the inside. It's a little bit higher in this one. And then for the forearm, same thing. The ridge muscle peaks much higher than the flexor group, and so you're going to get a diagonal. If you put these horizontal straight across like this, it's going to stiffen this entire contour. It's going to be so much more boring. So splitting it up into a high peak here with a straight for the wrist and a more longer, lower peaking curve here makes this whole thing kind of flow. Same thing in the leg. It's not symmetrical. You're going to have a peak here, peak on the inner leg, lower down here in the quads to the knee, higher peaking in the calf muscle on the outside, lower on the inside, and then also just diagonals across the malleoli. Oh yeah, and by the way, I forgot to mention, after this presentation's done, which, let's see, I'm about halfway-ish. No, I'm more than halfway, but maybe about 15-20 more minutes of the presentation, I'm going to start Q&A. So if you guys want to start typing in your questions in the YouTube chat, I got John looking through those, and he's going to send me his favorites. So I'll do like 30 minutes, 45 minutes of Q&A after the presentation. It could be about anything, but try to keep it to like figure drawing at least, Oh yeah, and I do have a free dynamic anatomy video. It was a critique video I did for, I think, the deltoid muscle. Doesn't matter. I talked about the whole arm, but it was I think one of my better critiques where I explained how to create dynamic anatomy in the body, and so go look it up. This is the video. So even on rigid parts of the body, like the feet, we think are just like a bunch of bones, which they mostly are, but there are a bunch of little bones that can move. You can twist your foot. I mean, look at you got a lot of twist in here. You can twist the toe this way a little bit. You can bend the toes forward, back. There's a lot of gesture that can be found in feet. And so if you start thinking about gesture, you can then put structure on top of it, all these blocky forms, but that structure is informed by the gesture. I'm not the other way around. We're starting with the story, with the pose, with the twist and the folding and the stretching and the pinching, all that stuff. And then the structure on top has to still show the gesture underneath. And things just look so much better. And then you'd put all the other stuff, the shading and the details on top of this. And again, you still have to make sure that the gesture shows through when you're shading, and the structure also shows through in the shading. I don't know why this is here. This is another example of asymmetry and how the peaks kind of bounce, and this flows through on the body. So you're not seeing the gesture I drew underneath this. All you're seeing is these cylinders, blocks. But they're these cylinders and blocks, they're conforming to the gesture. And when you draw a bloated cylinder on a leg, don't just draw a symmetrical bloated cylinder. Look at how it feels like it's flowing this way. because I'm bloating this side more than this side. In fact, this side is even slightly concave. It's going this way. Same thing here. It's curving more this way. The bottom curving this way. So the cylinder is flowing with the gesture of the leg, the S curve and C curve on this one. And then all the muscles, they all have to flow with what you just, what I described here. The gesture and the structure, that all informs me of my decisions when I put the anatomy on top. So here's another example. Very strong C curve from leg to leg. Zigzag in here. Lots of compression, right? You got compression in the knee, compression in the foot and the toes. Lots of zigzag shapes. Tension. So when I put the anatomy in here, I still want to keep the C curve flowing. And then if I were to finish this, I would make sure that all the shading in here keeps these strong compression points very obvious. Here's another example of asymmetry. When we think of metaphors in the body, one problem with a lot of those metaphors is that they're symmetrical. Like we think of the calves as a bowling pin, upside down bowling pin. But I mean, that's a good metaphor, but we got to remember that to add that asymmetry back into it. Otherwise, it's going to look boring and not accurate as well. Okay, the knee. This is a tough one too. The knee is mostly bone. And so all those bumps that you guys see on the bones, or on the knee, they're mostly bone, but there are some, there's also some soft tissue, which I'll cover soon here. But here's how I try to remember it. This looks complicated. Just ignore all the names. 4 of these points are just the corners of the femur and the tibia, which are the 2 big bones in the leg. One corner here, one corner here, corner here, corner here. So you got 4 of them down already. Another one is the kneecap right in the middle there, right? So there's 5 already. Then the two that are left is one that's the tibial tuberosity, which is, you could feel it right under the kneecap. It's just your tibia has a little point coming out in the front, and that's where a little ligament goes from kneecap to this point. And then the last one, the fibula, here on the side, see, right there. So those are the bony landmarks you're going to look for, and then everything else goes on to those. And you're not always going to see all of them, but look for them. When the femur bends, when you bend your knee, so this is the top of the leg, this is the lower leg, facing sideways. What happens is the kneecap actually stays with the lower leg, with the tibia. It doesn't go up with the femur, because the ligament here keeps it in place. This does not stretch. There's another tendon connecting the top to the quad muscles, but the muscles stretch in order to accommodate for the additional length that is required here. But there's nothing in here between these 2 points that can stretch, so the kneecap stays in place. It could go back and forward a little bit to kind of stay compressed against the kneecap, but it's just swinging across like on a string from this point. Now, if we ignore the kneecap for a second, because it's lower, you're gonna, when you bend your knee, you're exposing this bottom plane of the femur, which, when your leg is straight, this part is underneath. It's inside your kneecap, like in the middle. And then when you bend your knee, it's on the top, which just sounds so weird and freaky that like this part is inside your knee when it's straight. But you can totally see these ridges popping out. It's like a wheel. On the knee on a lot of people. Okay, now here's the fat and the bursa. This is the soft tissue I was talking about. You're gonna see this on people, and for the longest time when I was drawing people, I'd be really confused. Like, where's the kneecap here? Like, is it here? Is it here? Is it this one? But yeah, it's this one right here. It's the one right in the middle. This is another tendon, and then this is a ligament. And this is the fat and bursa protruding out underneath the ligament. Here, let me show you. See? Ligament in here, connecting kneecap to that tuberosity, and then the red part is this fat and bursa being kind of squished underneath and being squished outward. Ignore that. Moving on to hands. So hands are, second to the face, are the most gestural part of the body. We literally gesture with our hands. They're almost as expressive as our face. And we have sign language. We can literally just communicate with our hands. Which is why when cartoonists change the proportions of the body, they make the face and the hands much bigger so that on screen you could see those better. They have more screen space. The feet are bigger too, just because it would be weird if they were small and the hands were big. But it's really, these are bigger just so we could see the emotions and the communication of the body better in cartoons. So hands are expressive, even in a really tight pose like a fist, which feels like it's just a block. There's a lot of gesture here, a lot. Gesture is not just about flowy curves. It's also about compression. Look at the zigzags in the palm here. All these little shapes inform us of how compressed and tight the fist is. There is a curve running along the knuckles through here. You can even have gesture through wrinkles. I mean, look at these wrinkles through here. Really show us about the movement of this finger going through this way. It's not static. This is not a static pose. There's a lot of tension happening here, and also just make sure you look for variety in the knuckles. You can have two squares on the edges, and then the middle, this top, the middle finger has a peak knuckle, and then a more round knuckle for the ring finger. I know your brains must be fried right now with all this information. I'm sorry. But trying to fit almost my entire anatomy, all the most difficult parts of my anatomy course into a 45-minute presentation, so kind of expected. But so the hands have three muscle groups. There's one right here, and on the back of the hand, it's this little teardrop shape. And actually, they're all teardrop shapes, but between the thumb and the index finger, you kind of squeeze those together in your own hand. You could see a bump protruding out right here. And then on the palm, there's two. One on the thumb, one on the pinky. And the rest, that's it. Like these parts, this is the only muscle, really, the only muscle masses that you'll see on the surface. Sometimes you'll see little tiny muscles between the knuckles in here, but those are very, very subtle. The majority of the hand is skin folds, fat on the palm, tendons all along the back, veins also on the back. There's nails, and of course a lot of bone. All the knuckles and stuff are very important. But so these three teardrops, they're going to be the ones that will stretch and pinch and they'll move with they'll deform with the movement of the fingers. So you can get a lot of expressive gestural drawings based on the pose. Okay, so this is the fat of the hand. It's all the fat on the hand is on the palm. It's on the palm side, because we grab things with our palm side. We're not going to grab things with the back of our hand, and it's there for cushion. If you're hanging from a tree, if you're swinging a branch, you're holding something tight. That fat there is meant to protect everything underneath. All those veins and tendons and bone cushions are hard surfaces from other hard surfaces. If you try to do a push-up on your fists, you'll feel, do it on a hard floor. like on a tile floor or something, your knuckles will hurt because there's no cushion. But then do a push-up with the palms in your hands, and it doesn't hurt at all because your nerves are being protected. So what's happening here is you have pads all along the knuckles in here. Right here, the fingers end, or they connect to the bones in the palm right through here, and so you're getting this fat pad all along the knuckles in here, and then fat pads mostly concentrated along the two muscles, and then the middle is an indent. It's very concave, and so it looks like a little donut, kind of a square donut in the front. And then the fingers, every segment between each joint has a fat pad. And so knowing this, that the back is hard, the front, the palmar side is soft. When the finger's straight, you're gonna get skin compressing here, kind of a soft curve through here. And then when it's compressed, when we curl our finger, the bones are gonna pop out on the bony side, and the fat pads are gonna compress and pinch and overlap each other on this side. Do it right now with your finger. You'll see this exact shape. Okay, and then so hands are very complicated with all the little pieces in there, but when you start drawing them, you could simplify them to basically this curvy square box, but it's not a perfect box. It's a much flatter box, but it curves. It curves with the knuckles, and that, remember, the donut shape. The middle is more concave, and so you start with this blocky front, and then you divide that into 4 parts in perspective, and then you can protrude whatever pose you want. You can protrude some of these gestural sausages. Don't literally think of sausages, because then you'll just make them boring, but gestural shapes out from there, and you pretty much have a framework for the hands, and then you got to think about all the skin in between and all that, the muscles and fat, but it becomes a lot easier if you can get the pose down with these simple shapes. The thumb is kind of difficult, but if you think of it as just like an additional kind of pizza slice coming off of this square, it is easier. So when you can bring your thumb in closer to your hand, and it's a very thin, you can bring it out and it becomes a larger pizza slice. And you can also bring the thumb down in, like, away from this plane, and then it also becomes more diagonal like that. And then also when shading, it's important to remember those primary forms. I like to think of primary, secondary, and tertiary forms. Primary forms are that block that I just told you about, and each of these segments, these very large planes. Those are the primary forms. Side plane, top plane, front plane, top plane, front plane, top plane, front plane. Very, very simple forms, just blocks. Those are primary. Then you add secondary, and these are like the bones and the large muscle groups. So you're starting to add a little bit more information here for like the little plane changes of the knuckles, bumps of the knuckles. But still, there's not too much detail. Once you add the detail, this is like fingernails, veins, creases of the skin, freckles, hair, all sorts of those, little details that go on top that really have very little purpose in the beginning of the drawing. They actually tend to hide all that primary, secondary information, which is dangerous because, you got to make sure that this hand still feels like it's a top plane and a side plane. But you add this muscle in here, and look, this is broken up now, and not into a simple side plane and top plane, but now into like this weird curve in here. But it's still pretty clear that this is mostly just a side plane. This could have gotten out of hand completely and just got into this wobbly shape and completely lose the fact that this is a blocky form. But it didn't. It still looks like a blocky form. Feet. Yeah, feet are complicated. But I actually, since I made this presentation, I've actually I have a lot more lessons on feet. But again, they also can be simplified into these forms, blocky forms that you can memorize and control. That is the end of my presentation. So let's see. Yeah, I'm about 47 minutes into this. There I am. Hi. Okay, so I'm going to start with more questions. I don't know if there's enough questions, but we'll see. John, message me. Are there only 2 questions in the chat? Sorry, hold on, guys. Yeah, please, more questions. The first question is from SJ Jags. When drawing muscles, do you draw the full form from origin to insertion? What I mean is, do you draw the full form, then draw through the form? For example, in a figure of character. It really depends on what I'm doing. If I'm establishing the lay-in of the drawing, this is like the beginning stages, I'm not going to try to map every muscle from origin to insertion. Especially if it doesn't have any effect on the surface. You know, for example, you know, the biceps. They go underneath the pecs and they go inside, they go underneath a bunch of stuff. So I might think about where it's going and make sure that my gesture leads to that point, but I don't necessarily need to go and like show that it's going up underneath there. I can just kind of show a flow and make sure it's flowing with the rest of the arm. It's much more important that the shapes that are on the surface flow with the gesture. Because I really believe that accuracy of anatomy is less important than the story you're telling with the figure. It's more important to design the shapes to look good and to serve the composition. And so sometimes I'll design things that aren't necessarily perfectly accurate, but are just pushed a little bit towards more dynamic feel. And so if I focus on just accuracy of origin here, insertion here, here's the form, origin, insertion, here's the form, things will just look static. And so in the beginning, I'm establishing gesture, which is like, I'm not thinking about structure at all, or a little bit, but mostly just what's happening with the pose, very basic stuff. And then all the detail, all the structure I put on top of it is there to just continue my idea of the gesture. Of course, I'm considering accuracy. I'm considering what is actually happening in the body. And so sometimes I'll map it out and then lose it again if it's not important. So I guess to answer your question is I'd probably lean more towards not flowing from origin to insertion when I'm just doing a regular figure drawing. But if I'm doing an anatomical study, yes, I will. I'm thinking about everything about these muscles. But that's just for anatomical studies. They're not for just regular drawings. Callum Gillespie. Hi, Stan. Thanks for the talk. Let me see if I can make these bigger. Ah, great. Okay. I've been finding shoulders difficult in life drawing class. Yes, they're very difficult. What key landmarks do you look for after you build a head and down to the first rib? After you build a head and down to the first. Well, I mean, for shoulders, like basically the entire spine of the scapula, but obviously the points here and the collarbone. These are the landmarks. That's pretty much it. Everything around there is muscle. So, right? Everything Yeah, that's it. It's just like, whoop here, and then the scapula, the spine of the scapula going, and then going back down in the back. That's the big ones. You can't really see the head of the humerus, the arm bone. It's all underneath the deltoid, so never really look for that. But yeah, and when you're looking for the angle between these, keep in mind that you could lift up just one. They are independent. Just because you're seeing this angle doesn't mean that the torso is angled this way. It might just mean, my torso's straight, but one shoulder is up. Or my whole torso could be rotated this way. So just keep that in mind. These are independent. The scapulas are independent. They're flowing. And they're floating, sorry. Okay, more questions coming in. Cool, thanks guys. Marcos asks, how do you approach anatomical information when drawing clothed figures and figures that don't show clear divisions between the muscles, meaning more fat or average? Well, on an average person where there's more fatty tissue softening all that stuff, it's all still kind of there, but it's a lot softer, and that makes it actually more difficult, right? Because when you have an athlete or a bodybuilder where you can see every edge, the anatomy just becomes a lot more clear. It's actually easier. What becomes more difficult with people like that is gesture, because all those bumps, the more stuff you add, the easier it is to get away from that initial gesture, and the pose could become stiff. I mean, try drawing a bodybuilder. Seriously, draw a bodybuilder and try to make it a gestural pose. It's very challenging. You have to design. You can't just draw it the way you see it, unless you got there are some bodybuilders that just take really good poses. Arnold has great poses. There's another one I forgot. Just very, very great poses. But most bodybuilders nowadays don't care about that. They're just like trying to get as big as possible, and they're just stiff. And so average people and even larger, more overweight people, actually more gesture there, much more gesture, and it's easier because you got compression. The fatty tissue allows, anytime you bend, it's just like there's a lot of compression there and stretching on the other side. And the bumps are just bigger bumps. It's not a lot of little ones. So gesture is easier. Anatomy is more difficult. Like the muscles are more difficult to see, the divisions, but the only, if you understand what's underneath, you could see the subtlety. If you're working from reference, you'll be able to see what is still clear or what's present in that model, if you know what's underneath that fatty tissue. And then the other part of that question was clothed figures. Yeah, with clothing, again, if it's not somebody whose muscles are very clearly defined and they're not wearing like super tight clothes, then it's like you're mostly just looking at those big blocky forms. It becomes about the primary forms that I was showing in the presentation, where it's like it's really about the cylinder of the arm, but not completely, because if I'm wearing a shirt, you can see in the indications of where the deltoid ends and the triceps. I don't know if you get, it's pretty low, but you could see information. It's just super subtle, and the shirt is pretty tight on me. You could see the traps, you could see the delts, but if you didn't know that separation's right there, you might just simplify that, and it wouldn't look as accurate. But with clothing, you really do have to think about it as like draped cloth on top of a form, and there's two things that you need to show there. One, the cloth, and two, the form it's wrapping around. And so there's areas where are almost primarily just the form underneath. Like, if I have my arm out like that, this part has very little folds. It's really just showing the form of my arm. But then like this part of my shoulder, there's a lot of folds. There's a lot of compression because I lifted my shoulder up. And just like with skin, anytime you bend something, something's compressing, something's stretching. This part right now is being compressed. If I lower it, look at that, all that's gone. It's like skin. And so the parts that are stretching or being wrapped around the form, you have to know what's underneath in order to show it. And then the wrinkles in the cloth are amazing. They're really good to show the gesture of the pose. You just saw, like, I lift it up and it informs you that there's compression here. So don't think of it as just like all these shapes you have to add. Think about it as opportunities to show more gesture, to show the pose more clearly. You can edit drapery if you understand anatomy of drapery. There's 7 types of folds. You could look it up. If you understand all of them, you can identify. You'll know what's happening between those. Good question. Thank you. What are some? This is from Eli. What are some of the key differences you will take when approaching animal anatomy versus human anatomy? Well, I personally haven't done too much animal anatomy. I love going to the zoo and sketching, but I don't sketch them to study the anatomy of those animals. I sketch them because I like using it as an opportunity to sketch quickly and get gestural stuff and design my shapes. Aaron Blaze would be the one to ask about that, but it's all similar stuff though. I mean, it's just in a different proportions. You're drawing a cat, a lot of very same stuff happening, and they have spines, they have arms and legs. They're just proportioned differently, and the muscles are also proportioned differently. You look at a horse, the glutes in proportion to a human glutes are way smaller, tiny. You think that like a horse has a big butt, but that's not actually. Those aren't actually the glutes. Those are like the hamstrings going up and curving. The glutes are actually really small. But then on humans, we need to be able to kind of erect ourselves up straight. The glutes are large because we stand up, and we need those muscles to be bigger. And also, we sit on our butt, so we have more fat there. For the same reason that we have fat on the bottom of our palms. There's a lot. The fat is there to protect stuff. So the fat on our butt is there also to protect our pelvis. So yeah, I guess your key differences when you approach animal anatomy. Yeah, I guess I haven't done too much of it. I've never taught animal anatomy, so I don't know if I could talk about it eloquently. Calum asks, "Hi Stan, my weekly life drawing classes tend to have a lot of short poses. 4x 5 minutes or 15 of 25-minute pose, or wait, hold on. 5 minutes, 15. Oh, okay. 4 5-minute, 15-minute, and 25-minute poses. How would you approach these timed sessions to try improve anatomy?" Yeah, that's a good question. So, that's actually the 25-minute poses are actually really good to study anatomy because you do more of them. But you're studying something different. You can't study that subtlety that I was talking about, like with the layering, with how the lats are, are a thin cloth that go over the serratus and the erector spinae and all that stuff that's underneath the lats. It's hard to study that without actually trying to shade it and show forms through light. But check out Jeff Watts's quick sketches, stuff he can do in 5 minutes. I mean, you can get quite a lot of anatomy in quick sketches if you know what you're doing and if you can draw quickly. I don't recommend it if you're new to quick sketch and just drawing and anatomy in general. It's going to be almost impossible to get any kind of meaningful information in 5 minutes. And so for 5 minutes, if you're newer to it, I would say just focus on gesture and structure. And if you really want to try some anatomy, pick like one body part, like pick an arm and do the arm of that pose. You don't have to draw the whole body every time. I mean, especially if you're trying to study something more complicated like anatomy, there's no way if you're not at the level of Jeff Watts that you'll be able to get the anatomy of the whole body in 5 minutes. So pick something, an arm, or just the deltoid of the arm, just the shoulders, something, and focus on that, and that's okay. If you make it a little simpler for yourself to get a success. But really, the 25-minute poses are, I found to be a lot more manageable for actual anatomy stuff, because I could spend the first 5 minutes of that 25-minute sketch to do everything that I would have done in the 5-minute sketch, right? Which is just establish the proportions and the gesture. 5 minutes, boom, boom, boom. Okay, it's quick, it's there. It might not be perfectly accurate because it's 5 minutes, but you know, it's there, and I'm focused on getting the gesture. And then the remainder of the 20 minutes, I can kind of start figuring out the structure and the anatomy. And if I don't go all the way down, it's okay, because I already have the gesture of the whole thing established. So, yeah. I hope that helps. When painting, drawing draped figures, how important is it to know this advanced anatomy versus gesture and basic anatomy? And it's not hugely important. I would definitely say learning the mannequin is a lot more important when the body is draped. But it doesn't hurt. But yeah, it's not mandatory. Like, if you're never gonna draw somebody without clothes on, you could probably get away with basic anatomy, mannequins, basic forms, all that layering of like the lats over the serratus. If you're wearing a shirt, doesn't matter, right? So if you don't like anatomy, like if it's just painful for you, then yeah, you don't you don't have to spend decades learning this stuff. Just learn the basics. M. Collins asks, do you have a method for drawing anatomy from imagination? I find it hard to incorporate proper anatomy, gesture, and pleasing design. Yeah, I've done a lot of anatomy from imagination in my sketchbooks. A lot of time now or throughout the past like 6-7 years that I was developing the anatomy course, anytime I was focusing on a body, I would do a lot of sketching of that body from imagination, just to make sure I'm clear, I understand what this is. And so what I do usually, like if I'm drawing the full body, is I'll start with the simple forms. Here, let me actually show you the slide in my presentation real quick. This will make it more clear. Okay, going back quite a bit. Where are you? Oh, there he is. Okay. This is usually what I start with. This is so much more manageable from imagination. Like, I could think of the torso as the robo bean, right? If you've taken my figure drawing class, you know that if you know the bean and then how to turn that into the robo bean, you could draw the torso in any pose. And then attaching limbs to that as these cylinders and blocks becomes so much easier. And like, I could do poses of almost any, or figures of almost any pose if I simplify them down to this. And then, if I keep my lines light, I could start, imagining, okay, where are the bones in here? Because this isn't the bone, the pelvis is actually rounded in here. And so I start imagining what the pelvis looks like and trying to find my landmarks. And then from there, I'll see, okay, well, what is the body actually doing here? What muscles are going to be flexed? What's going to be relaxed? And then I start, designing some anatomy throughout all this stuff in order to accommodate the pose and flow with the gesture. This was not, well, was this? No, this wasn't. This was kind of from imagination. I don't think I had a pose that was exactly like this. There were poses that were similar, but I think I combined a bunch of different photos for this drawing. But yeah, like, it's manageable when you can construct it. I personally don't think like Kim Jong-gi. Very, very different approach to drawing. He'll start with this. He could see these forms already. I can't do this from the beginning. I have to start simple. I have to figure out the pose, the 3D forms, and then add details on top. And I think most people are like this. They have to do it in layers. And actually, before this, though, there is this is not step 1. This is step 2. The first step is the gesture, the flow, kind of scribbly, curvy lines, very loose indentation or indication of the pose. Then you solidify it with structure. And then you add muscles, and then you add the shading. Okay. But you also did ask about pleasing design when you're drawing from imagination. Pleasing design is about understanding the forms of the muscles, because you can't design what you don't understand. I mean, you can, but it's not going to be designed based off of reality. You're going to push it towards something random if you don't understand it. But if you understand the leg, you'll know how to push the shapes a little bit in order to push it towards reality, and towards reality that looks good. Like asymmetries, typically, you know, that's something you start with when you want to design something that's not stiff, that's more interesting. So when you add asymmetry, well, which way do you push the asymmetry? If you don't know the forms of the muscles, it's hard to, you don't know which way to push the asymmetry. So you could just go the completely wrong way, and it's not accurate. And sometimes it looks funky. It'll look wrong if you do it the wrong way. So yeah, design is going to be based off of understanding of what you're drawing. And this isn't just for the human body. I mean, designing trees, you got to understand the trees you're designing. You know, if you're doing a palm tree and you're designing it, well, it should be based off of the anatomy of a palm tree. If you're doing a pine tree or eucalyptus, there's things that are happening in these trees that you need to understand in order to design them to kind of almost caricature, right? Designing shapes is like caricaturing your subject. And to caricature the subject, you need to understand the subject. It even goes to like ocean waves. You know, do you understand how ocean waves work? If you do, you can do them from imagination. There's a lot of, you know, sea life painters. What is it called? Shoot, I forgot. But there are a lot of people that paint the ocean a lot, and they can pretty much just invent waves at this point, like dramatic waves with foam and, you know, the curve and like all this stuff flowing under, and they know how the colors vibrate when the sun is going through the wave. Like, it's just, they understand it so well now that they can invent it. And even if they're not inventing it, if they're just looking at a photo, they know how to design it to make it look more dramatic, better, because they could push the anatomy of a wave. So yeah, design is based off of information, I think. Let's see here. Another question from Calum. Hi Stan, further to the mention of Jeff Watts and Quick Sketch, how often do you draw from Riley rhythms to inform your anatomy? I use some Riley rhythms. I mean, Riley rhythms are very specific rhythms. There's some, like, for example, from the shoulders down to the crotch, and then from the neck to the hips, that I don't usually use those. They're very specific, but the idea of rhythms in general, I use, constantly when I'm doing gesture. It's just rhythms. I'm always looking for flowing shape or flowing lines between shapes. So I'm not like strict to the specific Riley rhythms, even in the face. Some of them I like maybe half of them, and then the others I just ignore and have my own. I just more follow the concepts that he taught, not the specific execution of it. So that's the last question that John sent me. I don't know if there's more in the YouTube. No, that was the last question in the chat. So cool. Well, anyway, thank you guys. I hope you learned something. I hope I didn't fry your brain too much. I know that's a crazy amount of information to unload on you. But I promise in the anatomy course, it's much slower than that. There's about 360 lessons in there that go into all this stuff way more detailed. So if you ever want to know anything about anatomy, it's probably in that course. It's at proko.com/anatomy, and today only 20% off. Use coupon code ANATOMYX for Vision X Live. That's the convention. I think that's it. John, am I supposed to say anything else before I end this? Oh shoot, what happened? Everything on my computer just minimized. Oh yes, well someone just asked, if you purchase your anatomy course today, can we complete it at any time, or is there a time limit? Yeah, you can complete it at any time. You can use it as a resource for the rest of your career. Honestly, I still use it. I go back to my lessons if I want to remind myself, because there's so much information in these 360 lessons. I forget what I learned about abs 6 years ago when I taught it. And the video, like the 25-minute video, is like a quick reminder for myself of what I learned. It's like, when you take notes on something, going back to those notes that you took 7 years ago, it's like a quick reminder. But also I have ebooks in there that you can skip through real quick and get information. So no, you don't have to do it at any pace. It's there for you. You can go through it whenever. You can skip around. If you want to start with legs, which is like the last part I teach, start with legs. Does not matter. You don't have to do it in consecutive order. Although the beginning of the course, I do go through some kind of introductory lessons that apply to everything, so you should probably do those first. But yeah. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Enjoy the rest of the conference. I will also be doing a panel tomorrow on the future of art education, so if you're interested in that, join me. It'll be at the same time that this was at. So anyway, bye guys.